Welcome to today's podcast titled Courtesy, the Knight's Grace in a Hostile World. Welcome to the Grail Standard with Sir Vane. Today we're going to talk about the next virtue from the book Chivalry, an Ideal whose time has come again. And we're going to talk about the virtue of courtesy. Now, I'm going to read a quote that I read before, but I think I'm going to read it again just to help solidify this. So this is Sir Ector's eulogy for Lancelot in La Morte d'Arthur, where he's discussing the paradox between the barbaric man and between the chivalry, which is having the strength and the courtesy in the both. So let's read this. And thou were the most courteous knight that ever bare shield, and thou were the kindest man that ever struck with sword, and thou were the goodliest person that ever came among the press of knights, and thou were the meekest man and the gentlest that ever lay in hall among ladies, and thou were the sternest knight to thy mortal foe that ever put spear in the rest. So, let's talk about courtesy. We're going to explore the knightly virtue of courtesy. So, first off, we need to define what courtesy is, right? So, courtesy is often dismissed today as outdated and unnecessary, but in actual truth, it's the oil that keeps the gears of society moving smoothly. For the medieval knight, courtesy was not about empty politeness or superficial manners. It was about showing respect to others, honoring their dignity, and treating even adversaries with a measure of humanity. Now, before the critics ever come and say, well, actually, in reality, not all medieval men that were knights behaved in this way. Yes, that is true. Not all medieval knights behaved in this way. But this is an ideal to strive for, right? You can't blame an ideal because there are people who don't honor it. But moving back to courtesy, so from an historical context, right? In the age of chivalry, courtesy was closely linked with honor. A knight's reputation did not rest solely on his prowess in battle, but also on his ability to conduct himself with grace and respect. Knights were often judged by how they spoke, how they treated women, and even how they treated their defeated enemies. To be discourteous was to be unworthy of the title of the knight. So this is where it comes hand in hand with prowess, because courtesy without prowess is not chivalry. So that's the important thing. So we're going to talk next about courtesy versus weakness. So this is where it comes in a modern context where people confuse this. So it's important to note that courtesy was never meant to be confused with weakness. A courteous knight was still expected to be firm, strong, and even ruthless when necessary. But courtesy demanded that strength be tempered by restraint. It meant that you could win without humiliating your opponent, that you could disagree without resorting to insult, that you could hold your principles while still listening to others. And I think this comes back to the first episode that I did on compassion. One of the things that you see in the stories of King Arthur is the fact that when knights fight other evil knights, it's not necessarily about killing the knights. It's about making them, if they live and they ask for mercy, you give it to them, right? So this is what separates the code of chivalry from just, because without courtesy, there's other virtues, but without courtesy, you're not a proponent of chivalry, but you're also not a proponent of chivalry without prowess. So it's the paradox of having the strength to fight, but also using it when necessary, practicing restraint. That's the double demand that courtesy places on those who practice chivalry. And that's why it's so important, right? It's not about, you should train to fight, but you're not training because you're fighting for ego. I'm going to talk about this after I go through this book, where we're going to talk about just war. But the point is, courtesy without courtesy, prowess is just barbarity. Okay, without a code of honor, a man is just a dog, right? And I don't say, and I love dogs, but it's just to point out that it's the code that makes someone greater, right? So we're going to talk about it from a modern application. So what does courtesy mean for us today? So in a world where online discourse often descends into mockery, tribalism, and even dehumanization, courtesy reminds us to treat others with respect even when we passionately disagree. Courtesy is choosing not to assume the worst about someone. It's choosing to respond to hostility with composure. It's remembering that every person you encounter, whether online or in daily life, carries struggles you cannot see. Courtesy is also a sign of self-respect. When you can hold your ground without lowering yourself to rudeness or cruelty, you display a kind of strength that commands admiration. Right? And so this really ties back into courtesy is also tied with compassion. And from the Christian perspective, it comes with accepting that all human beings are flawed, right? But that God created every human being in his own image. And this is, now, even if you're not a Christian, that's the root of chivalry. So when we talk about it from, like I said, the spiritual dimension, courtesy also has a spiritual dimension. The knight was meant to reflect the dignity of his calling and conduct, and in Christian terms, courtesy is an echo of the biblical command to love your neighbor as yourself. Courtesy is love expressed in tone and gesture. So this is the reason why courtesy is so important, but courtesy without the other virtues is meaningless. It's great to be courteous and whatnot, right? But without the other virtues to back it up. So the other thing that I'm going to say about courtesy from the book is that it's not about simping. It's not about being nice because you want something in return. It's about being nice because you hold yourself to a higher standard. That's really important. And we're also going to talk about the term of the word meekness. Meekness does not mean weakness like we said before. So Merriam-Webster defines meek as enduring injury with patience and without resentment, and 2, deficient in spirit and courage. So the first definition is actually really good. And in the story of King Arthur, there's a story where a maiden goes to King Arthur's court and she asks for a knight to come with her to rescue her brother. And she asks for Lancelot, but Lancelot's not available. So instead, he sends a kitchen servant who wants to be a knight, and this is his chance to become a knight. And she is absolutely unhappy about this, but she takes the knight in training along with her. And throughout the entire journey there, she is nothing but rude to him and discourteous to him, right? But he just puts up with it, right? And so this is where it talks about, like, the definition, enduring injury with patience and without resentment. Even though she's nasty to him throughout the entire trip to go to the castle to save her brother, right? He endures. The reason that he does this is because this is his chance to become a knight, right? Now, later on in the story, what he does is he channels that anger that he has from the comments of the maiden into attacking her enemies. But and later on in the story, she says that he's the most knightliest knight that has ever been. And I think this story in particular really talks about meekness, right? You know what I mean? It's about, like I said before, enduring injury with patience and without resentment. So it's not weakness. It's really restraint, right? That's really what it is. But also, it tells you a lot about a man's bearing, or about a knight's bearing, whoever you are that's following the path of chivalry, right? You know, when you're able to be polite even when people are being rude to you, or you're able to be assertive instead of aggressive, it says a lot about the way that you carry yourself, right? But courtesy doesn't, and that's the important thing about courtesy, right? It also comes with compassion. Right? Compassion for those. Like I said in the first episode, It's you, even when with people that you disagree with, you have to have compassion, right? Because from compassion comes understanding. And it's from there that even in some cases you're not going to be able to resolve something amicably, but it's where you start from being able to do that. So this was the Grail Standard with Sir Yvain's episode on courtesy. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and thank you for listening.